Hi, everyone. I'm Utkarsh, the founder of Network Capital, here with a friend and an author, Dr. Busch. Christian, welcome back to Network Capital. You've had quite an adventurous 2 years, right?
That's true. And thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
So, Christian, tell me, give me some highlights of the last year. What all has changed, and how has serendipity shaped your life?
Yeah. Well, it's been fascinating. I mean, the serendipity mindset. My first book came out 2 years ago, and it launched into the pandemic. And so, in a way, we had to practice what we preach, and somehow trying to figure out how do we make the best out of this unexpected moment that happened. And then serendipitously enough, it was actually a nice excuse to make it a bit more of a global launch, because you didn't have to travel now to different countries where presumably usually you would have had to travel to launch a book. And so it became more global than we thought. And then, yes, now we're launching the paperback, which kind of has this additional chapter that I'm very excited, because it's essentially a story that I very deeply personally care about. And essentially, it's there was a woman 13 years ago. She met a guy via a mutual friend, Fabian Pottmüller, and those two stayed in touch, and then reconnected a few months into the pandemic. And serendipitously so, with a couple of different incidences in between, she now became my wife, and we had just had our newborn child. And so everything turned out, fortunately, in some nice ways, but it certainly, it wasn't easy. I mean, I was here in New York. I remember when the pandemic started, we had all these trucks, with dead bodies lined up. We had hospital tents in Central Park. I had COVID, almost died of it. So it was an extremely tough period. But I reread Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and it was fascinating, because it was all about, obviously, how do you find meaning in this? And so one of the kind of meaningful things that came from it was really finding the love of my life, and having a wonderful child along the way. And you mentioned you also went further on the love front. So it seems like at least there are a few nice things coming out of the pandemic.
Clearly, I mean, the pandemic and love both seem to be in the air. And I'm glad that we are getting to discuss some of that. I love the title of your book, Connecting the Dots, the Serendipity Mindset. It seems like you're making a broader point that to some extent you can engineer luck. Can you engineer luck?
Yeah, I mean, the bigger idea really is to say, hey, usually when we think about luck, we think about blind luck. We think about things that happen to us, right? Being born into a good family, all the things we can't really pick. And I think that leads to a lot of social inequality and so on, those kind of blind luck incidences. But then there, is that kind of smart luck, which serendipity is, which is all about, when you look at the most purpose-driven, successful, inspiring people around the world, they have in common that they intuitively cultivate it. They intuitively cultivate unexpected positive outcomes. And so a lot of our work has focused on what is the pattern behind this? What does the social entrepreneur somewhere in the Cape Flats in Cape Town have in common with the CEO of MasterCard? And even though it's very different stories of serendipity, they have similar processes in common. And so I've gotten really excited about this idea that it's always the same process of spotting and connecting dots. And that means we can create more dots, but also we can learn how to connect them better.
Yeah. Why did you reread Viktor Frankl's Man's Search of Meaning? It seems like you were yourself in a slightly dark spot in the midst of the pandemic. And walk us through the thought process. What did you learn from it?
Well, Viktor Frankl was fascinating, because he actually helped me early on in my life a lot when I was in a similarly kind of tough period. And he was in a concentration camp, which you can imagine is the toughest situation one can think of, where every day you might die, where there's literally no hope. Objectively, there's no meaning in this situation. It is completely meaningless. And so he said, you know what? Even though it is a objectively meaningless situation, I will create some meaning. and I will imbue meaning in this. And so what he did was, for example, he would say, I will still talk with fellow prisoners tomorrow, make them feel better. And by doing this now, I have a reason to wake up tomorrow morning because I still have to talk with more prisoners so that they feel better. And so I really enjoyed that idea that, look, if you're in a tough spot, the way you create meaning is to somehow try to contribute something that gives you a reason to wake up tomorrow morning. And I think that's something that, I've always lived by that. But I think at the moment, especially, with COVID and everything that happens around us, trying to still find some kind of meaning in a tough situation, I feel is at least for me, has been the best way to alleviate anxiety and related questions.
Yeah. And in the pandemic, like creating serendipity became harder, right? Everything went online pretty quickly, and we had to basically change our work lives. You're a professor, teaching, everything went online, meeting people. Were you able to still inculcate a serendipity mindset? Were you able to connect the dots digitally?
It's interesting because, now more than ever, because if you think about it, previously, I think a lot of times serendipity in our lives has been, kind of almost like a nice to have, right? It's great to find the love of your life. It's great to find a new job, but you can survive without it in a way. Versus now, a lot of times out of necessity, we had to somehow create serendipity. If you're a brewery and COVID happens and you're losing your main customers, restaurants, now you have to say, oh my God, yes, I can use my alcohol to produce hand sanitizer. Or if you're a designer fashion company that loses their main customers, you might be like, oh my God, we can use our capabilities to produce masks. And so it's really kind of, I've seen that a lot with my students, where a lot of them had their careers lined up, internship in this bank or this consultancy and this and this and this and this, and then COVID happened and that all went away. And that was really the point where it was about saying, hey, how can we use some of these things that we're talking about and really say, okay, take it as a step back, take it as an opportunity to reevaluate what seems meaningful to you and what really kind of could be about it. You always took for granted that you wanted to be in a bank, but maybe now you can think about, what is it that I want to do in a bank, and could I do that in other areas as well? And can I now have the conversations that will then, in half a year or so, once people hire again, actually lead me towards that? And so it was a beautiful moment for some people to reorient themselves, to find more meaningful career tracks for themselves. I think it's obviously always tougher on people who cannot financially afford to have those processes. So I think it's, I always have this visual when when you have people on the Zoom screen and then you have the student at a beautiful Florida mansion, they'll be fine, right? Versus like you have the kid in some kind of impoverished area somewhere in New York, where you have 20 people in one apartment and 10 of them have to go out and work in the pandemic. You can see how COVID exacerbates a lot of societal inequality. And so I think, a lot of the kind of serendipity that I've seen has been very necessity based across the board. But I think it's been tougher for people who actually had to really fight for survival, quite literally. But I'm sure we'll talk also more about, I think a lot of companies have also found more virtual ways to create serendipity as well. So I think there's a lot of things we can learn there as well.
Yeah, I mean, network capital, for example, like we had to start doing all our programs and like a large number of our meetups in a hybrid fashion, an online fashion. And it did require a lot of re-engineering and setting the processes. I think many companies are better off, many companies are not, but it's a process. And I think in your Thrive article, which picks up a section of the book, you give examples of some of these companies. So could you tell us more about how organizations are embracing the serendipity mindset successfully, and what are the kind of organizations that are struggling to do so?
Yeah. Well, one practice that I'm a big fan of is a practice that has been used by companies around the world since quite some time, actually, which is the random coffee trial. And the random coffee trial is all about saying, usually one of the key beautiful things in companies that happens when you're in the office is those beautiful water cooler moments where you bump into someone and then you're like, oh my God, such a coincidence. Here's an opportunity that unexpectedly evolves. And especially for more junior people, it's nice, right? That that you could bump into the boss of your boss and then, you could have that kind of unexpected opportunity. And that has been taken away. And so the virtual coffee trial is really about saying people within an organization give times when they are free, and then they get randomly matched with people across hierarchical levels, across different departments for a quick coffee with an inspiring prompt, right? So something like, what's the key challenge you're facing and how can I help? And so what happens now is that those people, have these quick coffees, and it's not only a way to create serendipity, but also to kind of create this sense of belonging again to a larger company. Because, as you can imagine, people think they're very connected, but actually they're only connected with a few team members that they are on a Zoom call every week or every day. But with the larger organization, you're actually not that connected. And so you lose that sense of belonging. You see, great resignation, all these things, because there's obviously no real sense of deep belonging in that regard. And so I think those kind of practices are beautiful ways to create serendipity, but also more broadly to make people feel closer to a company and actually make things happen. And so I think companies that find it difficult, a lot of times you have, I think, especially old school companies, right, where you have old school leadership and like more paternalistic kind of or matriarchal structures, where I think it's harder to have those kind of things happen within them. But also, one thing that we've seen in our research, we did a large study with CEOs around the world that have navigated COVID successfully. And one of the things that came out of it is really that they're extremely good at saying, we have an approximate sense of direction, but we're also going with the unexpected where it leads us. And we don't see that as a threat to us, but actually as a beautiful, innovative approach that there could be something that's even more interesting, right? Like in this example of the brewery. And that's tougher for companies that have this kind of old school mindset that, this is what we've always been and we will always be that, right? That's tough to do in a pandemic.
Yeah. So are there some people who naturally embrace the serendipity mindset? And are there people who struggle with it? One factor you did mention is the economic or social, say, standing. Anything else? Is this a mindset issue at all?
Well, what's interesting is so actually a lot of the work that we're doing is in extreme resource constrained settings. So that's in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, for example. I'm spending a lot of time in Kenya, for example, and in the Cape Flats in Cape Town. And actually, you will see people who have an amazing serendipity mindset there. And so even in the most resource constrained of environments, you will see some people who do it. But of course, their starting level is very different, right? So me sitting here in the West Village in New York and having access to education and networks, the starting position is very different to a social entrepreneur who starts out in Kibera, one of the largest slum areas in sub-Saharan Africa. And so while we see the mindset across different areas, the propensity of how much you can do with it is of course very different. I think one of the key responsibilities that we have as people who can help shape organizations is to really have those starting positions be stronger, right? So in a way, it's not only about giving a kid from a less privileged background a scholarship, it's also saying, how do I give you 3 mentors who can directly help you with the job afterwards, or things like this that actually level the playing field more than just kind of like, unilateral, non-holistic approaches. So I think the first step, to your point, is really to do something around that structural inequality that keeps some people from having more serendipity happen in their lives. Another one, I think, it's interesting you mentioned, what I found fascinating is that I initially thought that people like us, right, who intuitively cultivate serendipity, I assumed that would be kind of the main group for whom this kind of work would be really relevant, right? So I was thinking, well, this could be a great way to have a vocabulary for people like us to say, this is what I'm doing, and to legitimize it, and to say there's a science-based foundation, that we're not just kind of like stumbling around and somehow things happen, but actually there's a process to it that actually is all about mindset and about creating a culture that allows you to have more of that serendipity happen. And so I think that's something I'm extremely excited about, and I think that fortunately has been working pretty okay. But then what I've been surprised by, and what I actually now enjoy the most, is people who I thought absolutely would not be open to that mindset. So the person who says, I don't believe in serendipity, or I don't need serendipity, or I don't think I can create my own luck. once those people start doing the first kind of exercises, we can talk about some of those, asking questions differently or setting hooks or other ways. Once they start doing it, they are the ones whose life changes the most. Because look, our lives, we can incrementally change. We can do more of those practices. We can legitimize what we're doing. But those people, essentially for them, it changes their whole life, because it's kind of, and to give you one example, a colleague of mine in London, he would, he came to me when I started with this work, and he was like, Christian, when I started kind of like with the distribution of the work, he came and he was like, Christian, look, I love what you're doing. I love, what your work is about, but I don't need serendipity in my life. Like I have a good life. I have everything I need. Like I don't need that. So we made a deal, and we said, go out there and just, do a couple of things slightly differently. Ask a couple of different questions, cast a couple of hooks, and then come back. He comes back after a few weeks, and he's like, Christian, oh my God, I didn't know life can be so joyful. And to me, really, this kind of like is the qualitative step change that people who I could never pitch to them. Like I can look, if we would talk and I would tell you about it, you would probably, the first times we connected, you intuitively resonate with it, right? Because that's your modus operandi. Versus someone like this, I can't pitch them. Like I will not be able to convince them. The only way to actually convince is to have them try it themselves and then see, oh, it actually changes my life. And that's what I found most joyful on my end, to see that change happen in people's lives, and them saying, oh my God, that actually changes what I'm doing in a very meaningful way.
So what are these magical questions, or what are some of these hooks that we can employ to make life more joyful?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a big fan. Actually, sorry, I had this. My straw is disassembling itself. It's these new, the new carton type straws that disassemble all the time. No, so I'm a big fan of very simple questions, but that kind of allow for a broader opportunity space. So instead of asking the dreaded "what do you do" question that puts everyone into a box, asking something like, what do you enjoy doing? Or what do you find most interesting about XYZ presentation that you just watched? Or whatever it is, something that helps you a little bit more getting an understanding of what the person is about. And to give you an example, if you would go to a fishing village in Italy, and you would ask the fisherwoman, so what do you do? She would say, well, I'm a fisherwoman. And you would probably say, well, there's not that much we have in common. Like, you're a fisherwoman. I'm doing an exciting podcast and other exciting things. So what do we have in common, right? But if you would ask her, what do you enjoy doing? She might say, oh, well, I enjoy being out on the sea. And like, when I'm there, like, that's when I feel most alive. And you might say, oh my God, I can relate to that endlessness. That's what like podcasts are about, where you can explore knowledge, and it's endless in its potentiality. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. But the point is, by trying to understand why someone does something or why they're interested in something, you find these unexpected overlaps that then even the most different people have something in common. And they're actually one of my favorite strategies to allow that to happen. Those kind of overlaps is the hook strategy. And the hook strategy is really all about this idea. And we briefly talked about this at some point, because it's kind of something I've seen work in every context, which is, doing a serendipity journal where you essentially just write down 2 or 3 interests. What are you interested in at the moment? Like in my case, for example, how to get the serendipity mindset into curricula and a couple of other things. And then write them down. And then in every conversation now, I'm casting these hooks, and I'm bringing in a side sentence saying this. And the amount of times where someone would be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. My aunt runs a school in Bangladesh, you should connect, is incredible. And the person I learned that from is Ollie Barrett in London, wonderful entrepreneur. And, if you would ask him this dreaded "what do you do" question, he would not just say, I'm a technology entrepreneur. He would always say, I'm a technology entrepreneur, recently read into the philosophy of science, but what I'm really excited about is playing the piano. And so what he's doing here is he's giving you 3 different hooks where you could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. My sister is teaching on the philosophy of science. come in as a guest lecturer. Oh my God, such a coincidence. We just started hosting piano matinees. You should stop by. The point is every interaction, every conversation we can use to cast a couple of hooks. And then from the most unexpected of places, the new client emerges. Your uncle's friend might know someone who gets you the new job, you name it. But we have to let people know about it by casting a couple of hooks. And it's in a way the opposite of pitching to someone, right? It's not about like trying to push something on someone. It's just saying, let's put some stuff out there and then see what people pick up.
Yeah, for sure. Have you looked at the 6 degrees of separation, like the research on 6 degrees of separation? I mean, you've set up networks. Now you're a professor who's written about serendipity. Reflect on that a bit for us, and what does that mean in today's hyper-connected digital first world?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because if you think about that we're all somehow actually relatively close, to each other. Like if the furthest person away is kind of 6 degrees away, for some people, for well-connected people like yourself, it might only be 2 or 3 degrees, right? It's incredible. I think when you're, I always discuss that with students of mine where, if you have 2 adjunct professors, like, someone who was the CEO at MasterCard, essentially you're 3rd degree from the Pope, you're 3rd degree from all the key people in the world, because that person knows a lot of these people, right? And so I think what's really important about this is that it gives us potentiality, right? It gives that idea that you are so close to literally every person in the world. There's no person in the world, if you're going to a school like NYU, but even if you whatever environment or setting you have, there's probably 2 or 3 degrees away from you an amazing person that you could directly access. And I think it's fascinating because a lot of people don't start out having strong social capital, right? A lot of us had to build that social capital and that idea that those networks can be meaningful, but also help us in what we're doing. And so I'm actually a big fan of thinking about how do I increase that kind of potential network, especially when I don't have those contacts yet, right? And so one thing I've done, for example, with people who have tough backgrounds. So let's say if you just came out of prison, or, like really kind of like rough CVs where you don't have a lot of, job opportunities in front of you, and you might not have the connections, to really kind of join a virtual event or a physical event at that's open to all, like Royal Society of Arts or LSE or you name it, and go to an event where you have 500 people or so in the room. And then whenever the speaker is done and they ask, okay, who has a question, you're the first one who kind of like energetically gets up and says, I have a question. And so, not too much doing it, but in a way that they can't ignore you. And as a moderator, I can tell you, we always like hope that people actually will ask questions. So it's likely that you can ask it then, and same virtually as well. And then really kind of asking the question in a way that says, thank you so very much for this inspiring speech. So making it all about the speaker, as someone who just went through XYZ, and then really sharing something about oneself. Like it could be whatever one feels comfortable. I had a question or wanted advice about XYZ, right? So it's a question you're asking, it's all about the speaker, but in the middle you build the hook. And that hook, usually what it does is there's always at the end of a talk, 4, 5, 6, 7 people coming to that person saying, my God, such a coincidence. My brother went through a similar process. Like, I want to put you in touch with like the company that hired him. Or, oh my God, such a coincidence. My sister is actually working with people such as yourself. You should come in touch. My point here is that what we're underestimating is the latent social capital. It's the social networks that we don't see. But actually, even if we don't know the speaker now can give us their social capital, their connections, their 1st degree connections or 2nd degree connections, if we're smart enough to open it up for us. And so I think that's kind of in a way, to your point, that we live in a networked world where some people are extremely well connected. And so the question then is, I think if you don't have that social capital yet, how do you in a way leverage the social capital of others around you in a very meaningful way, not in a kind of pushy or exploitative way, but in a way that actually allows people to come to you. And I think setting hooks is the most effective way to do that.
For sure. Christian, have you been interested in this social capital, latent social capital from the beginning? Did you have a linear career path where you sort of knew your research interest and your entire life has been a pursuit of that? Or has been the journey towards your career, a little bit of randomness, a little bit of serendipity, a little bit of maybe destiny. I don't know which one.
Yeah, no, it's certainly been very serendipitous, and I think one of the things that I found interesting, and we talked about Viktor Frankl earlier. So when I was younger, last time we met, we talked about how I had a near-death experience when I was quite young, and it took me on an intense search for meaning, and I started reading Viktor Frankl around that time. And what I realized is I enjoy the most connecting people, connecting ideas, and seeing how that all fits together. And that set me on a road, as community builder, company builder, and so on, and being very focused on how do you build meaningful relationships. And it's fascinating because if you think about it, when you think about what people regret when they're on their deathbed, they never say, I regret that I didn't get a fifth Mercedes into my garage, or that they usually say, I regret that I haven't lived up to who I could have been. I regret that I didn't live up to, having a high integrity, or that I didn't focus on the most meaningful relationships in my life. And I think that kind of idea that at the end of the day, what is life about? Life is about connecting with people in a meaningful way, right? Like everything else, so what? Like when you're on your deathbed, you might not care that much about. And so I think it's kind of, to me, that period at the beginning, made it very clear to me that I always want to do something that is around building relationships in some way or the other, but also helping others do that, because I've seen, a lot of social inequality in the world, for example, comes from people not having that access, right? I mean, we talked about this. A lot of my research has been around how enterprises and social enterprises use networks to scale up their impact and scale up what they're doing. And a lot of this is really, you might initially not have those networks. And so really thinking about how do we enable people to get those networks is a big part of, I think, for their success.
For sure. You and I have both studied networks, we've built networks. One thing that occasionally comes at me, or I've heard, is that, I've reached a stage in life where I don't want to meet new people. I just want to meet the people that I know more often. So, have you come across this saying? And if yes, tell us more about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because unfortunately, I guess there's only a finite number of people we can meet, and there's a finite amount of time that we have how long we can meet people, and so unfortunately that kind of like leads towards thinking about, okay, what is a way to, I mean, filter is not a good word, but to really think about like what is a good way to organize how to spend time with whom and with whom to spend that time. And I've always been fascinated by that question of green and red light and energy, in the sense of that when I go into a room, I look at people and I see green or red, and green are the kind of people where I feel intuitively this is someone kind of, whom I really want to catch up with and connect with. And then red is kind of the person where, when I was younger, it's the kind of person where I feel, it's a bit of an icky energy or an icky kind of type of person. And when I was younger, I'm the kind of person who then goes into the red zone and tries to kind of like get everyone excited in the red zone about new ideas and new this and new this. It's in a way the challenge that comes from then still connecting, especially with those people you feel who might be very different from what you're doing. And I think the older I'm getting, the more I'm like, nah, you know what? I also just really want to like be more with the green people and really kind of spend more time with them, because I focus so much on convincing the red people to become green that I have neglected a little bit too much the green people. And long story short, I feel one of my key learnings, especially with my amazing wife, whom I've learned a lot from in that regard, is I think I focus very much on kind of the kind of acquaintance type sphere and too little on the kind of close friend sphere. And now I'm kind of going back to the roots in a way in that regard as well, and really being much more conscious of those kind of the smaller circle friends and what that means. And I guess it's fascinating how I've seen that in a similar realm. I think with people around me, I think the pandemic probably made us all rethink a little bit whom we have close and how we have them close. And it's interesting that you thought about this recently. I mean, what made you think about it, or do you feel there was something that?
So I have actually, I have written about the pandemic and the changing network geometry. It's a chapter in my next book, which is just coming out. And some people I spoke to said this, that the pandemic made me realize that I don't want to spend my energy on knowing more people. I want to spend my energy just deepening my relationship with the few people I know. And it got me thinking that will this come at the cost of serendipity and will they regret it? So I thought I'll ask the serendipity expert about it, and that's how this question came to fore.
Interesting, and that's an interesting point, right? Because I guess one key assumption that I feel underlies some of our work is to say you can have a lot of serendipity with the people you know already, right? Like I can, by me spending more time with you, I'll probably have 10 times more serendipity than if I go to a random event here in New York and I meet 20 people, but there's not the same level of connection or the same level of kind of us both knowing a lot of people and stuff. And so in a way, it's more likely that we will have serendipity together than me with kind of like 20 other people that I get to know. And I think my point is that I think there's actually a lot of serendipity we can have, especially with the people we know already. But because we assume that there's kind of some kind of routine we have, with our colleagues, for example, I always see that with small teams, right? The idea always is small teams, I know them, there's nothing like unexpected that we can learn. Yeah, but like as soon as you ask different type of questions, there's so many unexpected new things coming, and so many new client leads might come from the boyfriend of your sister, things where you wouldn't expect it, but in a way it's always there. And so I think it's interesting to me that a lot of times I feel, especially with my close friends, there's a lot of serendipity once I allow for it. But because we usually are in a routine where we talk about similar things or in a way don't allow for that potentiality, it happens less. But I think it's a really interesting area that you're exploring there. And I mean, good luck for the book. I mean, I'll certainly check it out as soon as it's coming out.
No, thank you, Christian. You and I both have strong friendships, relationships, etc. And I think your point is so valid about having serendipity with the same person with the help of, say, the hook theory, or by asking more questions or knowing more about it. Do you practice that? Or let's just take your wife, or let's just take a close friend of yours. How do you practice this with depth-based relationships?
Yeah, it's a great point, because I think to me the big question always is how to I feel like there's always a thin line between something that is natural and authentic, and then the kind of trying to force it and kind of it's almost like these New York Times love questions where like you have these, what is it, 36 questions or something to make someone fall in love with you, and then all these VCs and incubators have used it for their co-founding teams so that they kind of can build rapport and fall in love with each other. I think that's interesting, and it's kind of nice as kind of one-offs, but I think it's you usually probably want to have like a more intuitive way to do that with partners and friends. Something that I found really interesting is two things. One is I've been very inspired by a friend of mine who has been together with his wife for a very long time, very happy, and they have a simple ritual where in the morning they ask each other, what do you want to achieve today and how can I support you? And in the evening they ask each other, what did you learn today? And what that does is, when you ask someone, what did you learn today, is that during the day, the other looks out for learning opportunities, but also there's always this thought of the other, right? You're always thinking of the other. And it's a beautiful way to kind of like constantly somehow be connected, even if you're not in the same room together. But again, also, I think the focus on learning and surprisingness, like in a way, allows for kind of new dots to emerge and things. And that's really the second thing. I've thought a lot, I'm a new parent, and I've thought a lot about how does serendipity apply to parenting and to families. And I've always found it fascinating that when you ask kids, for example, the simple question, like at dinner in the evening, was there something that surprised you today? Or, like anything that is kind of like where the unexpected plays a role. It's amazing how much kids bring to the table in terms of observations, in terms of like unexpected, like, oh yeah, teacher X like said this, but that doesn't make sense because this, and then you kind of like realize, oh my God, yeah, maybe that's a whole book we could write about this, that teachers don't know about X, Y, Z, whatever it is, doesn't matter. But the point is, I think it's simple things, simple questions, right? What's surprising you? What's kind of, what did you learn? What is it? But making it in a non kind of, what's the word? in a non-artificial way. I think that's the main thing. At the beginning, though, it feels always a little bit kind of like, artificial, but then you, in a way, make it a normal part of conversation, and it becomes more natural and part of it.
Yeah. Christian, did you reconnect with somebody or a set of people during the pandemic? And do you have any advice for people who are looking to reconnect and who are looking to start on the serendipity journey, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I certainly reconnected with old friends, because I think it's, to exactly our conversation, kind of reconnecting back to the roots in a way, a little bit. But I'm a big fan in general, also for your community members, like of just kind of small thank you notes, like even like being it a small postcard or like a quick call, or like I've started doing this with old mentors of mine, for example, where because I've always been kind of like fast checking things and like check, I haven't taken the time to properly thank people, to say thank you so much, professor, during my master's years you were the one who got me into the academic track, or thank you so much, XYZ investor, you were the first investor who believed in us when we did XYZ company. And I think what I found beautiful is, I did that with maybe 10 people, where it was just kind of, I wrote very heartfelt kind of emails and said, hey, look, thank you so much. Like, I'm literally just checking in to say thank you. And you've had such a big impact on me. And it was amazingly beautiful to reconnect with them, because it's kind of, it's a beautiful reminder, I guess, of our journey also, and of what's happening on our journey. But also, these are the kind of people who really, they've been part of our journey, so they truly care, right? And I think that's in a way, again, I'm sure a lot of serendipity might come from it, because they now again know what I'm doing, so I'm sure they will also kind of make some kind of connections around it, whatever. But that isn't kind of the major. That's always like beautiful secondary effects that come from these things, but that's not why I would do it. Like I do it because I feel it feels beautiful to acknowledge someone, and then them acknowledging that they actually like found that kind of, that they are grateful for that. And so I'm a big fan to really kind of just send a couple of grateful notes from time to time, and updating people about things. And I think a lot of times that's where a lot of beautiful things come from. But again, the most beautiful thing is to actually do it and just feel that one does it.
Right. When you've had a bad day, or when, say, people have had a bad day, do they forget about the beauty of serendipity, or are there things that one can do after a bad day or a bad week to sort of look at serendipity as a way of looking at the world with fresh set of eyes?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, because I think, when I had COVID, for example, I had 911 on speed dial. It was a very severe time. It's tough, right? It's tough to then think in terms of opportunities and reframing and everything else. But actually, again, that also then turned out to be an inflection point, right? Like that kind of tough period turned out to become an inflection point for me meeting the love of my life, and now having a beautiful child and so on. And so I think it's tough in those moments, right? It's tough in those moments to say, yay, great, like now let's reframe the situation and move on and go from it. But that's actually where the most interesting opportunities usually come from, right? Out of these kind of crisis moments, being at a breakup in a relationship where it's like, one door closes, but that door had to close in order to open up for like the really good thing, right? Like if you would still be in a relationship with that person who suits you, but not ideally, that kind of like then precludes you from actually having the real person that could be with you. And so I think it's again those moments where if I wouldn't have had COVID 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, well, 2 years already now, Jesus, time is running. I would have never opened my eyes to the idea of, hey, look, I have to spend more time on my personal relationship, and really kind of figuring out with whom I really want to be in life, and so on. So I think it's really around this where the reevaluation of things a lot of times comes from those kind of crisis moments. And so it's easier said than done, but I'm a big fan of these Adam Grant ideas of when you are in a tough situation, try to disembed from it and ask yourself, what would I tell a friend? Because we're really good advisors usually to friends, but not really to ourselves. And so it's really about kind of perspective taking and saying, okay, what would I tell a friend? And in those situations, a lot of times what we would probably tell a friend is, hey, look, like there's also something that might come out of this. There's an opportunity in here. And I think that's kind of what the serendipity mindset is about, to say, is there still some kind of meaning or opportunity in this situation, even if it feels tougher than we would like it to.
For sure. In your book, you've got endorsements from like some of the top professionals and entrepreneurs, Ari Huffington, Reid Hoffman. Was there a role of serendipity in getting these endorsement or blurbs, or you already had like in-depth relationships with people like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, with that regard, with regard to the book, it was a mixture, but in general speaking, what I've seen a lot with people who got amazing blurbs from people, a lot of times they just say, look, like, I will contact the 50 most inspiring people who have like some kind of relationship with this content, and then you do that with 50 people and you will get one, right? Like, it's kind of it's in a way one of these things we talked about, degrees of separation. Almost everyone is on LinkedIn. Almost everyone is second or third degree from someone. So trying to get an introduction to someone, or to, online, you can literally find everyone's email, right? Like, it's incredible how everyone's email literally is online, and you can find it. So it's really something where I feel a lot of times it's really like with everything in life, like with jobs, like with every application, it's a numbers game, and it's really about saying, how do you contact as many people as you can that you find extremely inspiring, and then like are extremely kind of authentic with them, in the sense of like really truly not sending a mass email to 50,000 people, but really saying, this is the one person who inspired me about XYZ, and I'll tell them that, and if they feel they want to then support that, that's great. And I think that's also a great way, by the way, for those of you who aim to write a book, and really this idea that asking someone for an endorsement is also a great way to just have someone read your book. And so I think it's always nice to, something I underestimated with the hardcover version is how much there is in terms of really kind of sending out review copies and having people just read through it and engage with the content. I was like, no, we'll just kind of, whenever it comes out, it'll come out. No, I think engaging people around it, that's where the true magic comes in. And so I'm a big fan now of really thinking about, how do I have quite a few people read the book beforehand, as endorsers, but also as informal endorsers, right? Posting about it, things like that.
I think one of the things that you could definitely do, I'm not sure if you've already done it or not, is to have a serendipity community. So we have Serendipity Thursdays on Network Capital, where people in groups of 5 or 6 are matched, and they don't know each other, but they're just connected in the same community. And often they have really interesting conversations. Sometimes they get jobs, sometimes other things happen. Maybe we'll try and have this as part of our Serendipity Thursdays module, and maybe you could set up your own community, a Serendipity community that reads the book and connect with each other.
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm a big fan of communities, and we've certainly been doing some work around the community part and so on. So I'm a huge fan of anything that somehow brings communities together. And I think obviously you've built an amazing community with yours. So wherever there are touch points, always excited.
For sure. Christian, what was the most meaningful note someone sent you after reading the book? And what, if anything, was the pushback that someone had against the book?
It's a great question. I think in terms of the most meaningful one, two. One is the mother of an autistic son who, when COVID happened, her son now didn't go to school anymore, and so she had to be at home with him, and she felt completely overwhelmed. And so she said, look, like, with these tools in the book, now I saw that as a situation where I can meaningfully connect with him for the first time, where we can now somehow meaningfully actually develop a deeper relationship and see that as something. And so she sent a beautiful thank you note saying, hey, thank you, like, for helping me redefine the relationship with my son. To me, that was beautiful also because, in my mind, we talked about this, in my mind, the content is mostly for people in companies and organizations, or people, now parenting or so on. But I think this deeper idea of coping with anxiety, coping with other themes, that's really something that I've seen a lot. I mean, the second note really was from a psychologist who said, look, to me, this is one of my major toolkits now I use with patients around anxiety, like how to quote unquote take control of the uncontrollable in a sense, and make people feel safer about it. And obviously, I'm not a professional when it comes to these kind of questions, but I can see how that kind of can really help alleviate anxiety. It certainly did in me. When I come from Germany, we love planning and strategies and everything, and then real life happens and you get anxious. But actually, that mindset has really helped. I think in terms of pushback, it's interesting because I think the intuitive pushback that some people have when they see the title is, oh yeah, is this kind of one of these law of attraction type things where it's just kind of like voodoo type, can you create your own luck, or is it about privilege where like you can like out of privilege create more privilege? And that, to me as an author, it always feels like, but then please first read the book and then you can comment about it. I feel like sometimes people comment about a title without having necessarily been diving into the book. And so I think if there was any pushback, I think it's from people who might see the title and say, okay, luck is probably is that some voodoo stuff versus diving into it. And then the law of attraction type, where it's like, oh, is this just something spiritual? Whereas obviously this is a science-based framework where after the third glass of red wine, I'm a big fan to talk also about how spirituality plays into it. But I think in general, I'm a scientist at heart, and so that's to me at the core of it.
Yeah, for sure. And before we let you go, since you mentioned spirituality, the science you've explained, maybe explain the spirituality as well.
Well, look, I think one of the most beautiful things with serendipity is the magic, the magical feeling in the moment, right? This kind of idea of, oh my God, like what a coincidence, and I think that magic, we never want to take away like that magic, right? I think that is kind of at the core of serendipity. Something that I've been thinking more and more about, talking with a wonderful colleague of mine who did a lot of work around synchronicity, is the question of what's similar and what's different from things like synchronicity, which are these kind of meaningful events in time, right? Where, let's say, these moments where you're thinking of your sister and exactly that moment she calls you, or you're thinking of an old school friend and exactly that moment you bump into them in the street, right? Those are the kind of moments, they're beautiful, but there's no active part we have in them. It's just literally, in a way, a kind of probabilistic question of what's happening, but they feel beautifully magical, right? Versus serendipity really being the active element of having to do something. When you bump into someone, how do you cast a hook, and then some kind of amazing thing comes out of it. But to your point of the spiritual, I've always been fascinated by how science and religion a lot of times say the same thing. Where when you look at a lot of the social sciences, especially in sociology and psychology, are around this idea that if you put good things out there, and if you're good at building a community around yourself, and if you put good things into that community, it's very likely that good things will come back to you. And that's in a lot of religions, in a lot of spiritual ideas, that's the more you contribute to the world and to people, the more karmic almost things come back to you. And I think I've always been inspired by this, and I think serendipity has been a nice excuse to explore those overlaps. That at the end of the day, it's a lot about saying we are all interconnected and we are all here. We all are looking for a higher purpose. A lot of us find it in philosophy, right? I grew up more focused on philosophy, others in religion. But at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, which is connecting with something bigger than ourselves. And I think that's kind of something, again, how we do that, if we create that by our organizations, by our religion, and so on, that's always the thing. But I'm a big fan of really, reframing. I used to always be kind of skeptical of religion and everything else. But what I've learned really is that at the end of the day, religion and meditation, for example, have a lot in common. They are about connecting with something bigger than ourselves. Like meditation, you're connecting with nature, you're connecting with yourself, you're connecting with kind of that, and the same with a prayer. You're connecting with some kind of higher force that's around there, being it energy or in meditation. And so, long story short, I feel the beautiful thing around serendipity is that when we look at it scientifically, we can also see that actually the same thing has been said by a lot of spiritual leaders as well.
For sure. Any parting message for readers of your book, for people listening to the show, or is there any question that we should have asked you but we haven't?
That's a great question. I think, at the end of the day, it comes back to Viktor Frankl, and my favorite quote, or not quote, he never really said it, but like the spirit of what he says is so much about that we can not always pick the situation we're in, but we can always pick our response to it. And that's where our freedom is, our liberty, and in a way, our serendipity. And so I'm really a big fan, especially in moments like at the moment, to not take a situation as given. Like, yes, like a lot of people are being dealt really bad cards at the moment. And I think that's something where, again, we can never blame anyone for bad luck. We can never, like not see societal inequality. I think that's really, really important to see that as a first aspect. And then at the same time, I think for each of us individually to really think about, is there still something in this situation that I can respond to, that I have control over? Because I think a lot of times in life we focus on the things we don't have control over, and that gives us a lot of anxiety. But actually, how can I focus on the things that I can control? And that's actually giving us then more meaning and joy, and probably also make things happen a bit more. And so my kind of key suggestion is reading Viktor Frankl and really diving deep into it.
And my key suggestion is reading Connecting the Dots Around the World. Hopefully, Network Capital people have already been motivated, and I'm sure they're going to pass this on. Christian, congratulations on becoming a husband, a father, and for writing a fascinating book. I think the message is profound, and I'm sure lots of people who are in need of connection and rediscovery are going to find meaning in this. Really appreciate you taking time out for us for writing the book, and see you soon.
Thank you so much, Luca. I really appreciate it.